He was murdered in his own church, and his case remains unsolved. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Father Alfred Kunz. Viewer discretion is advised. Alfred Joseph Kunz was born on April 15th, 1930. He was born in Wisconsin, and it sounds like that's where he lived his entire life. He came from a big family. He had, I think, 6 or 7 siblings. In the mid-50s, he became a priest. He would end up back in Dane, Wisconsin, where he was the priest at St. Michael's, this church here, and that is where he worked until his death. The time this case occurs, he's not married, he doesn't have a wife, he doesn't have any kids. He lives a very quiet and very private life, the life of a priest. And apparently Father Kunz was very polarizing in Dane, Wisconsin. Some of the parishioners there would call him a saint. Others said he was way too rigid. This is a very small community. At that time in Dane, there was like a population of 1,000. So even people who didn't go to church knew Father Kunz. For the most part, he seemed to be a pretty well-respected person in the community. This obviously being with the Catholic Church, he was never really involved in any scandals himself. But we'll get back to that here in a little bit. It was the very early morning hours of March 4th, 1998. 911 receives a terrified phone call that someone had been stabbed inside St. Michael's. The victim was found covered in blood in the hallway near the lockers, and this is some of the blood that spattered onto the lockers. It was a very bloody crime scene, and unfortunately the victim was already gone. There was no saving him. The victim was identified as Father Alfred Kunz. He had been stabbed multiple times, but also his throat had been slit from one end to the other. It was a slow and agonizing death. And obviously, from the moment this came to be, it was a huge story there in Dane. Again, while he was a polarizing figure, he was never a figure that people disrespected. There wasn't like any known animosity towards him, but he was killed in an incredibly brutal way, left for dead in the hallway of this church. The crime scene initially did not really yield a lot of evidence. Pretty much the majority of the blood they found was the victim's blood, but it would be years down the road when they determined that there was other blood sources at the crime scene, and thankfully they preserved the evidence well. But blood evidence was found, later on that did not match Father Alfred Kunz, and they believe that that was probably the DNA of their killer. But that DNA has never matched anyone yet. So, who would do this and why? The first theory that actually came to be was a robbery theory, because apparently other churches in that area of Wisconsin and outside of it had been robbed. And so it's possible that he may have interrupted a robbery, or the robbers didn't realize he was there and they killed him in some kind of struggle. The other thing is that they believe that he did fight back because he was a well-built guy, he was healthy, and he could hold his own if he needed to. And so maybe he saw someone doing something they weren't supposed to do, and that person reacted. A fight happened, and then they ended up stabbing him. However, they've never been able to determine if robbery was the actual motive, because they couldn't really tell if anything was stolen. It didn't appear to be anything stolen. But it could have been like it was interrupted, so they didn't actually steal anything, but that was their plan initially. Second theory that came about was just basically who he was as a priest. That because he was so polarizing that he was either really well loved or people thought he was just way too rigid, way too strict. Maybe they did not like the way he approached being a priest, and perhaps he was killed for that. He had very, very traditional beliefs, and he was not a priest that would, conform with the times as they moved along. That he stuck by the original teachings, and that rubbed some people the wrong way. But would you kill someone over that, though? I mean, really? The third theory has everything to do with the Catholic Church and the sexual abuse scandals. But it may not be what you're thinking in this case. Father Kunz was never actually implicated in any sexual abuse scandals himself, but he believed that there were other priests, other people at this church and the surrounding churches that he believed may have been involved in that kind of thing. And so Father Kunz actually launched his own investigation to look into these sexual abuse allegations. So it is possible that he was about to uncover someone's dirty secret. That person found out and killed him. If you really think about it, the way he was killed was brutal. He had about 8 or 9 stab wounds, and then one, his throat was cut from end to end. That's brutal. That's hatred. That's anger. It did sound like that there were some people who believed that he may have actually been involved in the sexual abuse scandals himself, but his parishioners would stand up for him, and other people would vouch for him as well, that he was not that person. He was trying to stop that from happening. So did that lead him to a body bag? I think that theory definitely holds the most weight. Obviously a humongous scandal, one we all know about, and I'm sure there are plenty of these people who would want to protect their secrets, and they might kill for it. And did they? Did they kill for it? I don't know. No one really seems to know. And that's the thing. His case has remained unsolved. So like I said earlier, they have retested the evidence in recent years, and they found DNA that did not belong to him, but unfortunately it has not matched anyone in the CODIS database. So his killer remains out there, somewhere. Someone somewhere out there has got to know the truth, and perhaps that someone is you. If you have any information on the murder of Father Alfred Kunz, please call 608-284-6900.